Recording in progress.
Welcome back, everybody. So this session is to discuss our work program for 2026 to 2028. We've seen some slides from the staff before and given a little bit of feedback there, but we now have a fleshed out document. And this is an opportunity to provide input. I'm going to ask Bastian to talk through what's there, why it's there, and where he thinks he may want our input in drafting it further. And of course, we'll all have contributions to make as we go through it.
Thank you, Carol. Yes, just to echo your introductory remarks, this is based on an input presentation of staff to the GSSB in the May meeting, if I recall correctly, and the subsequent discussion of the GSSB, where we try to now formulate a program that captures activity that we can foresee for the coming 3 years, starting in January 26, spending all the way to December 28. This work program, as presented, explains importantly the ongoing committed projects, as well as those that are only committed. So the GSB has put a couple of projects forward already and approved them, which we still have to activate, if we will, as part of our ongoing work. One comment is that across what we do, we have a very high level of activity based on the ambition formulated in the prior work program, where one major aspiration was to catch up with the update of the existing standards, and in particular the topic standards. Program, we manifested that there is much more work to be done on sector standards, and that has come through in the level of activity as well, with 4 currently sector standards in development at this moment in time. The work program breaks our activity again into different portions that are orientated around the main components of the system of standards, topic standards, sector standards, and universal standards. That's a way we contextualize, I think, the slightly different nature of the projects that would start under these headings. And we also, of course, have observations around the implementation of the GI standards and the and cooperation with partners covered here. There is no priority implied as such between the different sections of the work program, so it's not because revision of topic standards is listed first, right? This is in itself the priority or signaling a priority. We look at the different projects basically on the same level. However, the work program is a possibility for the GSB to induce priority at this stage. The one implied, just to close this out, the one implied priority from staff side that is got into that draft is to complete all the ongoing committed projects with priority. So we see that really as something where, fortunately, for the most part, we are in the second half of the project or close to the end of the project already. But it is paramount that we carry this through and complete the technical work. Then a bit.
Bastian, so just to clarify, with regard to topic standards, these are the topic standards listed in table 1 of the paper?
Yes, these are the topic standards listed. These are the ongoing revision projects, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So just in terms of where they are,
I'll come to that. I'll go
Okay.
to the detail now,
Yep.
to the different
All right,
sections.
sorry.
Yeah. So when you look at the revision of the topic standards, the first thing to say is that there are 2 portfolio projects underway with a significant number of standards that are in existence already that we're updating under these portfolio projects. This is the project on labor that, as it is currently scheduled, will span still the next year. But we are now, with this meeting, at a stage that all comments are ready to either go for public comment in the near future or have gone through public comment already. So for the standards that are listed here in Table 1, we are now in a position to have the outcome of the initial deliberations of the technical committee and an exposure draft ready. And for the most part, we've completed public consultation then on these standards. 4 are still to be discussed publicly. For economic impact, so again, portfolio project, there we've also completed work on the on these standards, but for the most part, and you have approved public consultation drafts already that will go out in the near future. But this project will span longer than the next calendar year. We know that already. We will aim to complete as soon as possible, but we will be running for a little longer. And then pollution. That is an ongoing project as well. There we are actually prior to the exposure draft status and an approval of our exposure draft. This will come to the GSB in the near future. What we're listing in terms of additional projects is content that we have identified before as outdated, and outdated, I think, on 2 levels. One is these contents have not been reviewed for a significant number of years. The last update of the content actually predates the development of the GI standards. These contents still stem from the time that we had guidelines. One of them has seen an update, I think that must have been around 2011, but the other contents date back even longer. And so there is, from staff side, there is, in terms of priority, content to be looked at that with a similar rationale as the labor standards and the economic impact standards. There's as a lot of best practice has developed in that space, a lot of also legal concept when it comes to rights of indigenous people and all of that. So there is a rationale to review. Is it an absolute priority right now? That is a bit where we need the steer from the GSB, but it makes sense from the logic of keeping the full set of standards updated. And I think in a similar vein, we have done work now on some of the environmental standards through climate and energy. Before that, we've updated the water standard. We've looked at waste. But when you start to update standards in that space, there are knock-on effects. And materials, GIS 01, is an example of that. The waste standard you could look at again at this stage, water as well, was the constant evolution in that space. So that is a second package of work. Also to say that there's this climate nature nexus in the background in a discussion that touches upon these contents regularly. In terms of development of new topic standards, based on the discussion we had, we from staff side said we have now, for actually the last 2 work programs already, had discussions with the GSB whether in the space of digitalization there is a standard setting effort needed. So this predates actually the prior work program. This has been an ongoing live discussion for many years. And from staff side, we would recommend to look into this if it is deemed a priority as a new development of thematic content. For the development of new sector standards, I think it is important that here we are looking at adding to the initial set that we've created through the pilot, that we have 4, and this is in table 2, 4 ongoing sector standards projects, textiles and apparel, and then the financial services was banking, insurance, and capital markets. We also have already approved, I mentioned that earlier, that there are project proposals that have been approved prior by the GSSB on a standard for food and beverages. And this is on the basis of an approved draft, approved project proposal, and also inclusion in the work program. GI has fundraised against that project, and we have funding available to implement that project. We've discussed yesterday the work on the interim sector resources, and I think that is a consideration at this point that we're bringing into the work program and through the draft of the work program. Potentially we can update that section now also with your discussion yesterday in mind, but there is now the consideration for the GSB whether we switch to prioritizing the work of these compact standards when we look at sector as opposed to fully fledged sector standards in the format that we have developed thus far. So that is something that we're looking at, and we have included for now the clusters that were also part of the paper yesterday to give orientation for how this could go down, how we would prioritize within that. We put all the parameters around that there's still discussion needed to define the clusters, and I think that there are multiple factors that we need to take into consideration, but we felt it's good to give visibility of where the discussions are right now, and there's also an opportunity, of course, to invite feedback through the public consultation on that. Yesterday we had a detailed discussion on the alignment of topic standard and sector standards, depending also what we decide on the compact standards and the prioritization of that. That is something that can have different level of priority going forward, and maybe it's becoming a little less relevant. But what we know is that we have 4 sector standards under development now, and they will need to be looked at in relation to the topic standards that are updated. So there will be an alignment project, a follow-up to the one that we had within the next 3 years, because the ambition is to keep the system intact and upon an effective date to have everything aligned across the system whenever possible. This is on the sector standards. Then a last piece, as I mentioned, where we're going through the different parts of the system, the universal standards. We have had discussion in 23 and 24 regarding a narrow scope amendment, as we called it at the time, for GI1 and GI3. This was primarily focused on changes in the reporting landscape, regulatory developments, advances in digital reporting, but also, I think, as would paraphrase a bit, this link of impacts, risk, and opportunities, right? And there were text proposals on how to change this. We then proceeded to look at a project for impacts, risk, and opportunity guidance. This project also includes basically the acknowledgement that there is a decision to be taken where such a guidance would reside, whether it would be part of GI3 or not. And as a package, we see this earlier discussion on narrow scope amendments, this guidance work that is pending, the work that the GSB has done to look at policy adoption and whether it can be facilitated by changes to the in accordance model, or I think the in accordance model of the GI standards. These are inputs to a potential update of the universal standards. So we, from staff side, deem it likely that these things will come together. Whether all of them will come to fruition, we don't know yet, but that there is enough content to update the universal standards. And how significant that update is, I think, is to be determined at this stage. But we wanted to flag that here in the work program.
Can I just ask a question? If it's not significant, so what's the difference in the process, if any, between an insignificant change and a significant change?
I think if to stay in the space that we're listing here, if we have a fundamental change to the in accordance model, then that is something that we would want to expose and consult on very widely. If we were to decide that it is the right moment to look at these narrow scope amendments that were, I think, given the discussions and how they continued over the last 2 years, we would anticipate that there's very little that stakeholders would object to make these. There's more reflection on realities rather than a position of GI rather than a controversial disclosure content. That one you could probably just introduce. I'm not even sure whether we would propose to have a public consultation necessarily for this type of content. But the reality is then, if we look at changes that comes through this connection, I didn't mention it earlier, but the sector program has made certain recommendations that change parts of the in accordance model. Then you come into that space where there is significant change, significant enough to go through the full due process in terms of public exposure and also discussion with stakeholders.
So it's 2+ years since we were talking about the boxes in GRI 1 and GRI 3 and updating them to reflect the changes in the global reporting landscape. It might be very timely to bring into those standards in the context rather than the disclosures some of the material that we've been discussing through our global reporting system paper.
Yeah, I think from staff side, we would probably agree that this guidance on impacts, risk, and opportunity piece is going to build on this, right? A lot of the concept that is in there would probably, in the global systems paper, would be elaborated on in this piece. So it would come back through that. I'm not sure whether there is content that into the current structure of the standards beyond that, but that is of course something we can discuss.
We do already have some wording for how there's a linkage with other standards, and it's 2 years since we were talking about that, and yeah, we could delay it longer, but we probably ought to have something in there now at this point, because this is where people are looking for answers.
Yeah, I mean, what we can include here is that we bring this back and we look at whether that is a priority. The one recommendation from staff is to combine as much as possible when you open up these key standards, because if you look at this and you indeed also have the ambition to look at policy adoption and changes to in accordance, if we open up the standard for one change and then we introduce a new version and have another change shortly after, that's not ideal, I think, from that perspective.
I guess it would depend whether initial change is required to go out to public consultation. If they're not affecting the actual disclosures, but they're more context explanatory.
Yeah. So, okay, shall we take actions now, or shall I just complete the summary of?
I think we're at a good point to discuss what you've been through so far, because then we move on to another section. So, yeah, I think so. So views from GSSB members on priorities from what is outlined here and based on Bastian's rationale for inclusion. Jeff,
Did you mean to
sorry,
say
not
Charles?
Jeff.
It's been a long 2 days, so it's okay. No, it's more a question. I know it's maybe a technicality, but on page whatever, the page where you have a table ongoing topic standard. So you list all of the standard project for labor, for economic impact. Yeah, and then at the bottom you said project covering these all topics. So I wasn't clear where they were, why they were not in the table, and what those means, the bullet points. Do you know where do you see where I'm going?
So my understanding is the tables are the ones that we're already working on. And the bullet points are ones which are well overdue a review. The standards were published in 2016, but they were based on the previous GRI guidelines. So the disclosures haven't been touched for well over a decade.
So if they didn't make the table, it's not on the project of.
So for the ones that are in the table, these are live projects with an approved project proposal, with technical working groups working on bringing exposure drafts to the GSB, or they have brought them already. The other projects are the follow-on, once we've completed these topic projects and potentially other projects, these would be the next ones up. And there is a logic why they're the next ones up, and that is indeed that in the overall ambition to keep everything updated, these are the ones that have been not looked at for the longest time. So that's something we're trying to address here.
But they're still part of the 26, 28 time scope.
Well, this is in our, so the way we set this up right now is to suggest, if we want to allocate and prioritize resource and prioritize work on topic standards, then these two, in terms of revision projects, these two portfolios would be the ones that we are proposing.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so maybe if we stop there, would anybody think it was inappropriate for us to prioritize finishing those standards that we were already started? No. So that's a number one priority. And then these other standards, which are well overdue review, so the disclosures date back to the GRI guidelines, which were well before 2016 when they were. These would then be the next priority in terms of topic standards. Yeah? Or maybe not.
Do you mean the next priority in terms of revisions to existing topic standards, or
Yes,
also the
I mean
creation
that.
of new ones?
Yes, good point, yes. Because we then have to weigh this against whether there are any new ones that we think we need to create. Do you have you got any thoughts on that, Bastian, from the work that your teams are doing?
Well, only one consideration. I think starting a new project requires more resource than a revision. I would just, based on experience, I would put that into the mix. But there are different rationales as to where you want to prioritize. I think with the revision projects, I would always say it is in the interest of GI to have up-to-date standards across the system, to the extent that this is possible given resources and everything. But there is also a positioning element to developing new contents. We've seen that with the text standard, for example, where GI occupied a space that no other organization could occupy in that same way. And I think there's something about this novelty aspect. There is something about inviting leadership practice for transparency on oftentimes contentious issues, right? And that's a consideration as well. But I think from a resourcing perspective, we probably have to say they are, to a certain extent, mutually exclusive. You can either do the one or the other, but staff doesn't have a preference of one over the other at this point in time. Yeah.
Okay, so if we look at the potential new ones, the only one you've listed there is digitalization. And we'll ask members in a moment whether they have ideas for others. But when I look at what you say would be included in that, I'm kind of wondering what the social, environmental, and economic implications are from the text there, because we're looking at social, environmental, economic impacts of digitalization, presumably in a standard, not other implications.
My response to that would be we've done the research and we pointed to all these impacts across the three domains, and I think that was a reflection on there was enough substance coming out of the research in terms of recommendation to that you could come up with a standard at this point in time, or you could at least look into developing the content for that. Maybe too soon to say that you would end up with a standard. Whether that holds together is I think that was debated at the time. There were different views also on the GSB on that.
So this is Rebecca speaking. I had a couple of comments. On the digitalization, I think there are profound consequences for social and environment from that digitalization. Consumption of data and data centers as one, and then how inclusive, for example, digitalization is of people across the world. I would strongly recommend that development of that standard, because I think we're a little bit behind on this topic, and it's an opportunity, even if we're behind, to show what you've mentioned, Bastian, some leadership in concepts and creativity in how we deal with the impacts of this topic. And then the other comment was that I think it's very important that we have up-to-date existing standards. The world, for the ones that were last updated in 2016, that's 10 years ago almost. And I think the world has changed so much. Now, there's a risk of these standards not being, in a way, relevant anymore.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Anne from Global Labour. I just wanted to agree with Rebecca's comment, and in addition, ask Bastian, in the work that you've already been doing, I know we're going to be coming to talk about sector standards, but I was very interested as to, for example, whether the link to the existing outdated standard around rights, had that come up in the discussions that you've done, for example, in developing the mining sector standard, and bearing in mind that if we're looking ahead, we're thinking about agriculture. And so to what extent during that sector process was a need for refreshing those older standards identified?
Yes, I think I can confirm that these standards have also come up. And I think it's really this nexus of local communities and indigenous people in certain contexts as extension of that, but also a topic of conflict in affected areas, high-risk areas, that has come up in all the resource-focused sectors, right? Let's put it like this, and land use-related sectors. So that's definitely coming from the sector work, and as an example of where our way of moving through that sector approach actually then renders priorities for the topic work.
Shulendra, Mediating Institutions. Just to agree with Rebecca on digitalization, just to add one small component there, Bastian, maybe it will be also good to add on the use of AI in that same standard. I think that's very important. It'll probably have a lot of implications.
Yeah, so based on the research, but also I think we just let me check in line 89. We're giving such as AI as a reference, so it's definitely going to include that question. Yes.
Hi, it's Deborah. I think I was actually just rhyming in to support what Rebecca was saying and agreeing that we actually need to do both. So I guess my question is, what does it take to get both done? And is that something that we could make a business case for? Because I think you can't ignore digitalization. I think part of the strengths of GRI is being ahead of the curve on picking up on issues that companies and investors struggle with and struggle to wrap their head around. And again, we, as a standard setter, we have to make sure that our other standards are up to date. So I feel like we have to find a way to do both and see what it takes to do that.
Sorry, I don't have a suggestion for a different new topic standard. I just wanted to also voice my support for the new topic standard on digitalization and AI. I think the impacts are scarcely known at this point, and it's because of the fact that it's a several-year cycle to develop the topic standard. I think now would be a great time to begin the process in earnest. But of course, also sensitive to resource constraints. And so I think it's basically how it's laid out already. But my suggestion and preference would be to continue with the topic standard revisions that are currently in flight and commission the launch of the new topic standard on digitalization and leave other topic standard revisions until funding becomes available. One point of clarification I wanted to mention is on line 93, we say that any project to develop a new topic standard must be fully funded before commencement. So this topic standard on digitalization is the only one referenced in our work program. Should I take that to mean that it is not currently funded?
Yes. Short answer is yes. So currently, this would be something that GI would need to fundraise against. Importantly, also because we would anticipate with new, just based on experience, we would have to build an infrastructure around this standard in terms of engagement, implementation guidance. And we would want to fundraise against that before we start the development. It is definitely a space where there is interest of different funding parties, but also broader stakeholder interest. So we could see that going out with this proposition is something that will render funding eventually.
Thank you.
Rebecca, again, a question. In terms of resource difference between a compact and a full-fledged.
Oh, can we stay on the topic standards for now? Because we haven't finished this one yet. Thanks. And I was going to ask a similar question in relation to the topic standards. What is the resource implication of updating these very, very old standards versus developing a new standard, a new topic standard?
I think when you look at the standards here that are proposed in this portfolio for updates, for revision, I would say that by combining this in a smart way, we would still require less resource than developing the digital standard. I think the digital project will probably require more resources. The change in these issue areas will be, as we've seen for labor, and some of the other standards that we've gone through, it will be significant. It will not be just incremental, but it could very well be that some of the contents are retained. With digital, we really start from scratch, and I think the research was very clear that while there's a lot on pointing to certain impacts, there was a lot less in terms of already developed concept and model for disclosure on this, right? So it requires more steps, so to say.
So if I've understood correctly, we cannot start a digitalization topic standard unless it is funded, unless or until it is funded. And the cost of updating all the remaining topic standards is about the same as developing a new standard.
Yeah, I mean, we would have to do, would have to look at this in more detail. I think when you look at pure cost of it, then the revision project will probably be less costly than the digital project. That would be my take based on experience. Yeah. The revision project would be less costly than the digital.
Okay.
Yeah.
And if we don't update the topic standards and they're coming in new sector standards, that's going to create more work down the track, is my understanding. Is that correct?
In principle, yes, although that connection exists for many more topic standards. So that wouldn't be my primary concern. Also, the timeline that we're looking at now already, that would be at the end of the next work program that these standards would become available. So for the sector standards that we will be working on the next years, that is something to consider. There's another consideration. If we move ahead with these compact sector standards, then you would probably encounter more sectors where we will, through research and other activities, get feedback on these particular topics. That could also very well be. And the compact standards only reference a topic standard. They don't go into the disclosure detail. So it's easier to update that going forward. That's just one additional concept.
Okay, so just sticking to prioritization of the work on the topic standards for now. We've already got the number one, finishing off the ones that we have. The arguments around whether we then go for updating versus a new standard are that it's going to be cheaper to, or less resource intense to update all of the remaining topic standards versus developing a new one. And we may be able to attract funding for the new one, which we're unlikely to attract specifically for updating the old ones.
No, I'm not sure. I'm not sure that I would make that case. I mean, digital is certainly a hot topic, but for the others, there are also dedicated communities that would look into funding. So I'm not sure whether I would. The chances of fundraising success in the current context, hard to comment on it. I wouldn't say that we can give a signal whether the one is more likely to succeed than the other in terms of fundraising, right?
Okay, thank you. Does anybody else want to ask any more questions around the choice between updating existing ancient topic standards versus creating a new one before we actually make a decision on the priority?
Sorry, can you clarify the all the topics and which need
I'm kind of trying to make the point that we need all of these.
Yes. Yes.
I mean, one way of, and I think this is what the work program is doing, I think we can induce in the next draft this priority of finalizing, completing the ongoing projects. And we can, without indicating a priority, list the other ones. And then we have a menu of things that we can look for funding for. And that will not necessarily determine your decision, but can be an input. If we come back and say there is funding for the digital project, then this can commence, and if there's funding for one of the others. But yeah, it's just very difficult if that becomes, and we're inducing it, if that becomes one of the decisive factors, but we have not more information on that, we would limit us maybe a bit in that sense.
I agree, we can change our priority at a later date, but we need to prioritize now so that we know where to go from now based on what we know now. We can always change it later if we get different information. Charles?
Well, I was kind of going to my point. I really prefer to see them on the table. I know it's just a visual. It sounds like this is like an appendix kind of thing. But my other question I was thinking, so all these 2016 GRI standards, they are on the website right now. And do we know organizations have been following those ancient standards like this? Because now I'm questioning the relevance of those GRI reports. Now we follow standards from 9 years ago.
So I think
more than 9 years ago, because it was prior to.
Yeah,
the
so
updates,
for
right?
some issue areas, the contents have moved a lot, for others, not so much. the point is that we have not had a technical project to even evaluate that. And I think, to give the example of the labor-related standards, there were some that were probably saying there would be much more change than we've now seen after an expert group has looked at it. So I think they are in use. Of course, depending on subject, there are a lot fewer that use the securities one or than the local communities one, for example. Right? That's something.
Follow up on the funding. Does it have to be specific to that standard? The funding has to be specific to that particular standard, or can it be a funding that is kind of
in the past, there were different funding arrangements for GI. Sometimes GI had success to fundraise just against the proposition of standard setting, with unrestricted use, basically. And we have currently projects that we fundraised for specifically. An example that is given here is pollution, currently in the topic standards. That is a project we fundraised again. What we've listed is food and beverages that we've also fundraised against.
Okay, so I'm going to ask members to signal whether they think updating the ancient standards is a priority or whether developing a new digitalization standard is the next priority. And we can always change these priorities if we get new information. But in terms of going out to consultation on the work program, I think we need to say what our priorities are so that we're all clear.
Before that, I have one more question.
Anna's got one first.
Okay.
Sure. I just wanted to, this is Anna speaking, I wanted to make a quick note that when we refer to 2016 and earlier standards, they're not necessarily all automatically outdated or ancient. There are many standards in use now that were published way prior to that. So I would prefer to not refer to them as ancient, and they are quite useful in many cases. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. That is a good point. We're just trying to drum up the resources to update them so that they are really up to date. Yeah.
And linked to that, this is Rebecca speaking. Bastian, have we had comments from reporters highlighting that the standards are no longer up to date?
I think what we can say is that as part of the sector standards development, there were comments on best practice in those areas and also changes in the normative frameworks underpinning them. And that feedback exists. So it is an area of in line with the best practice. And that holds for local community, that holds for the other ones that are listed as well. And this is also mentioned, I think we're bringing this together with the operations that happen in conflict areas. That is also something that has been discussed in the various resource-focused sectors.
And so what percentage of the standard would be then subject to needing changes?
I don't think we can say that right now, because that really, as we've seen with the labor project, that necessitates.
So just to put a fine point on that feedback, because that was my exact question. Thank you, Rebecca, for preempting me. But to make sure I'm understanding correctly, basically the age and the parts of these topic standards that have become out of date as the world around them has evolved have begun to show, but we're not getting substantial outcry from reporters about them being
so
out of date.
there's no representation that something is fundamentally broken and no longer usable. Something like that, I don't think we have received. Whether it's just the general point that that we're making about this whole logic of updating, right?
Okay, Harold, and then we're going to finish this discussion.
So Harold Powell from the staff. Yeah. So what essentially the comment of Anna was very good. And yesterday you saw the example of water. But there's also content being made, it's 2018 standard, but it's literally taken over by other standard setters. So it's not actually about the content. Also in our labor standards, a lot of the disclosures stayed in there, but what you see is that experts say you miss things, you do not update it, so it goes to a more, I would say, aggregated level. In climate, we see the same. Some things which are now practice in the workflow, these are missing. That's the point. I think a lot of our disclosures are very strong because you see they are used. And the kind of comments, especially in the working group and also in PCP, there's typically things which we get back, you miss some elements. So also the ones we mention here, yeah, if you do not update it to the current practice, what we are supposed to do, then you're at a certain moment, of course, you're not relevant. So that's what we're talking about. That's why at least every 5 years or 4 years, you have to review your content to see if it's still. And in some standards, we only we revise very little or not. If it's not necessary, we will not revise it. But you have to review it. And typically in the last couple of topics, all the topics, also pollution, you will see that some content which was already there stays in there, but some things which are now relevant for all the people who make decisions, whether it's investors, other stakeholder groups, information they now need nowadays, we have to come up with, we have to discuss what is relevant enough to bring in the standards. That's typically the update of the existing ones. The new ones, like digitalization, we start from scratch. It's a big discussion where to put your focus on, and that takes a lot of knowledge and a lot of discussion expertise. So that will be much harder. Also, so this is a little bit the background on. So we got feedback, but not. If we get feedback now, it's typically on missing some things out, like an update of a water filter. Is very
okay, so I am going to ask one last question, even though I said we weren't. Harold, what is your recommendation to the Standards Board as the Director of Standards for Topic Standards in terms of the next priority after the finishing off the ones that we have?
I would prefer, I think it's the one also Bastian mentioned, so based, if you would have enough funds, then you would, I heard everybody want to do both. And then it's still looking at the time frame, digitalization, it's not there yet. It's a difficult topic, it's big, it's easier to revise other ones, so I would put my bet on that. And there are thousands of practitioners, so they use the elements. But the first one is, ask us to find the funds to do both. If not possible, then I would say a revision of what you initially decided several years ago.
Okay. Let's see a show of hands for the second topic standard priority being developing a new standard for digitalization. And a show of hands for the next priority on topic standards to be updating the existing ancient topic standards. Four against, what was it?
It would have to be 9.
Yeah, okay.
It has to be either or.
Well, we have to prioritize.
I think we need to vote again because Deborah was confused.
Okay. Okay, I'm going to ask first about digitalization. Oh, yeah?
Yes, Susanna here. I just, maybe before we take take the temperature of the room, another clarification, because it's still, yes, unclear to me. So we have financial implications for the new standard, and then I understand there is revision and updating. So maybe I think that the revision, so like this checking if the standards are still, up to date is one exercise, and maybe it's less cost demanding than revision and update. So can we have maybe differentiation what we are actually prioritizing?
Okay, so the standards division are recommending that we prioritize updating the existing standards. And if we look at them, there will be things that we want to change and update. There's a lot of time that has gone by.
think if you look at them, they will be updated.
Yeah. Okay. So we have the recommendation from the Standards Division. We've been through all the arguments. Please raise your hand if you would like our second priority to be up a new standard on digitalization. And if you would like to prioritize updating the existing standards.
4, 5. So 7 versus 5.
Okay,
With one abstaining.
Felipe and Zuma are missing.
Yeah, of course.
I missed that, yeah. So we, yeah, so it's a very close vote, signaling the importance of doing both. So we've done the work on the topic standards there. Then if we could go to the new sector standards. Bastian, just sum up what decision we need to make here in terms of within the sector standards. I don't think we do we? Because we have the project proposal on the compact standards, which needs to go through, and then we already have decided on the prioritization within the sector standards.
So if I understand the discussion correctly, also here the principle applies that we first complete the existing projects, right? Then we have a decision before you, well, yesterday you approved the compact standards, and this will move forward. Then we will come to the final approval first quarter next year. I think that's what we're envisioning. But there is this other component. We have fundraised against the sector standard for food and beverage. And given your discussions yesterday, we need to reconfirm, I think, whether this should form part of a set of compact standards or whether we run this as an individual project. I think otherwise we're just we're assuming that we're moving ahead with a fully fledged standard there.
Is the funding commensurate with a full sector standard effort, or?
I think this can be discussed. I don't think it is necessarily. The concept, of course, that was sold at the time was the one we had.
Okay.
But with funders, in my experience, usually you can always go back and explain how these type of approaches have evolved. And yeah, the question is more: do we want to is available? Do we then want to apply them for the food and beverages, or we start this standard as part of a cluster of standards, basically?
So on the food and beverages one, can the funding that we have for that be used for a compact standard rather than a full standard? Or do we have to do?
I think that's something we would need to go back to, but that's basically the question, because for the GSB, it's more, do we now, based on just reflecting on the discussion yesterday, do we move to this new model with priority now, or do we continue to do both in parallel? That's what we need a steer on at this point.
Well, let's forget the topic versus sector standards. What's the decision within the sector standards?
No, this is not. No, this is the decision. So we have the compact standards.
Okay.
As a project proposal now.
Yeah.
But in the prior work program, the next priority up was food and beverage. You have approved a project already, but we now have to understand whether that forms part of the compact standards, and then we need to think how that comes into a cluster. But I think it's just reflecting on yesterday's discussion that would be in keeping, and while we test now the compact standards first.
Yeah, I would suggest we test the compact standards, but open to other views. I can see nods. So we go for compact standards with all the sector standards now then. That's the decision. Now our decision is how we place the relative merits of the sector standards versus our, and where we place them in terms of our prioritization of the topic standards. Bastian, Helka, Harold, happy to hear your views on that.
I can provide one orientation. As we're currently scheduled, the sector standard projects will close first. So this is where resource will, in principle, become available because projects are closing next year, right? And then subsequently, the topic standards projects will also close out. So it is not so that we can, in principle, there is a lot of flexibility in our setup, but we cannot just apply all the resource we have immediately to new projects because there's the implementation phase and all of that. And there's also a skill set and the way we work issue in the different teams. So moving people over from topics to sectors is also not always the same thing. So what I think from staff side, we would still recommend to continue on both fronts, but the gap that we have identified in sector standards with a need for more guidance on the materiality assessments and also regulators stepping back from this is one, if we want to fill that, that's in the immediate future, right? That's in the short term, and that has triggered these discussions on the compact standards.
So it's difficult to transfer people from the topic work to the sector work and vice versa. So what we do then is we just have separate priorities for sector and topic standards and work both as the resources are available.
I think that is where we are right now. Of course, we have some flexibility with staffing and pulling teams together, but we would still recommend that logic that you look at both sides. And if to stay in the example, if then we have the opportunity to work on digital, then we could take that on. If we have the opportunity to work on that local community indigenous nexus, then we could take that on. And in parallel, we could explore there. We have now clear guidance. We have the compact standards as a priority within sectors.
All right, Charles here. I don't want to confuse things, but I'm confused. So, yesterday there was an alignment project presentation by, it sounded like the starting point is a sector, even though her graph was somewhat confusing, but sector, and try to align with the topics. I get that. And then there was a item, yesterday on update on sector list, grouping 1, 2, 3, 4. And so when you did the cluster for figure 1 on this document, it accordingly, right?
The clusters are updated with the list.
Not this list, because we were waiting for the
So
decision.
right, okay. So the list that was approved yesterday will be
is still
reflected
to
on
inform the cluster discussion. So but for the clusters, what we would do is to update the reference to that list now that you have approved it. But it wouldn't change the proposal for the clusters as they stand here right now. It would still
So how do the clusters differ from the grouping? That was more a question.
This is Helka Buitrago from staff. There are some differences, but it's in terms of how we organize the different groups for the development of the clusters. But the sector classification as it is now, that will be updated and will inform the clusters.
Okay, so we're done in terms of what we need to give you in terms of topic and sector standards, which then comes to universal standards. I mean, there is an option to update them for work we've already really done, which isn't going to need to go out to consultation, and just get that done fairly quickly. I mean, the background work has already been done. That is one option. And then other things where we'll need to go out to consultation, where they actually affect disclosures, we can take all together at a later date, because that's a bigger exercise. Views on that? Standards? People, please, Bastian?
Yeah, I think, as I said before, we would probably have to surface again the contents from almost 3 years ago now, and verify whether that is still the extent of change that would form part of a narrow scope amendment, and then we could proceed with that. Just one note about the change, even if it is just a few sentences throughout this in the system, that is very significant change when it comes to the translations and everything in the knock-on effect. So that for the team, it is still this consideration: can we group this and only do it once? And is the messaging in the standards so important that we need to do this and apply resources to it? Of course, it is always more laborious if you go out for public consultation and all of that. That is then a totally different thing, but there's still work. We're doing this across 11 languages. There is change here that will be induced.
There's one argument. Another is that the work that we have been doing really signals why companies should be doing this, and provides that background context about how the work that they do from our universal standards fits in with work they're doing in the broader corporate reporting context. And that's probably quite an important signal to send. Any other points people want to make on this discussion?
I think a lot of us would think, yes, we need to do everything. So it is really hard with the prioritisation. But I suppose I'd say, Carol, where I am at the moment is that I think the discussions that we had with finishing off what we've already started on the topic standards, updating those that urgently need revision, and then ideally seeking funding for the creation of a new digitalisation standards, I feel those seem to be more immediate priorities than doing the revisions of the universal standards. So I suppose where I would say at the moment would be that we'd flag it up maybe at a specific time during the work plan to kind of come back to, has that then become more urgent? But I suppose I'd prefer to prioritise the more concrete pieces of work that we've just discussed personally.
I kind of disagree with that and with on your take, and that's because I think given the current landscape or the reporting landscape, we need to provide our reporters that guidance of I think what we spoke about in the global reporting system as well, and that kind of ties in with GRI 3, the IROs the paper we spoke about. So yeah, I ahead of maybe even the revision of the existing topic standards. The new ones, the ancient ones.
Sorry, what would you put ahead of that?
The universal standards.
You put that ahead.
Yeah. Universal
Okay. I do think it's important as well.
Just to come back on that, Chandra, I suppose I'm seeing the revision of the universal standards has been something more substantive, and Secretariat, get back to me on this. I don't think that precludes us from providing guidance on what we've already got, and in fact some of the discussions we've had, as Carol had mentioned, already does that. So maybe I was understanding the revision of the universal standards as being a more substantive piece of work, but I don't see kind of like that we can't say anything on guidance on those issues if without revising the universal standards per se, but correct me if I'm misunderstanding.
it's also kind of follow up. I kind of agree with Shalendra that I think the universal standards, if it is substantial and if it's really not providing the right guidance, because also a lot of countries is lacking back or drawing back on their sustainability reporting standards. So this is where the universal standards becomes a very important guidance. But I was also trying to get Sebastian talks about how major is the changes. That's also kind of making or help us making decisions.
So what we have and what we're referring to is the discussion of the narrow scope amendments that is linked, and that was very minor. It was some slight modification of text, clarification mostly, I would say, and introduction of the change that there was a development in the EU that would already be outdated now, and the IFRS, right? That was, if it is limited to that, that's what we would call narrow scope. If we add any of the other considerations, then this becomes a bigger project. But as any one of these three things that are listed here, whether that's the sector recommendations, whether it's the guidance on impacts, risk, and opportunities, the policy adoption would make that a bigger project already. Whether if they all come together, then it's ideal from a standard setting perspective to combine as much as possible. We will probably not have the resource to do that. Yeah.
Bastian, which team would work on universal standards?
I think that we would pull people together. We don't have a team per se that is doing that.
Okay. Can I suggest that we look at communicating what we would want to put in the universal standards in terms of up-to-date context information as a priority, but not actually update the standards themselves just now, test out the communication and put that out to reporters in different ways?
So that means looking at these narrow scope amendments and see whether we want to update them. Is that what it is?
Well, we've already discussed updating them some time ago. We now have a global reporting system paper. Can we look at those disclosures in the universal standards, which Laura's very familiar with, and look at, should we be doing a communication to reporters now that updates that information? Not necessarily putting it in the standards initially, but putting out a communication that updates that. That would address Chalendra's concerns, which I share, around reporters needing to know this so that they know why they would be doing this and where it fits with other standards, without the involvement of updating the standards at this point.
Yeah, I think we can definitely come up with a piece that describes how based on the paper, that how the standards sit in a more succinct piece, how they sit in the wider context. That was the discussion we also had there, that the paper as such is great as a detailed read, but we need a two-pager to communicate that, and that's something that we can definitely do. Yeah.
That might involve communicating our global reporting systems paper to. So we leave that on the work program for now, but it's not a priority. We'll continue with the priorities we've identified on topic standards, work through the priorities that we're very clear about on sector standards. We have the universal standards update there, but it won't be an immediate thing that we turn our attention to. So that then leads us on to the next section around what we say in the work program around collaboration with partners. Bastian, do you want to say anything on that?
In the past, we have signaled two things here. One is that the GSB has a proactive attitude towards engaging any party that has an interest in the discussions around impact focus and reporting, right? And that we welcome these dialogues, right? That's one. And we have and that's still in here, laid an emphasis on the European Union as leading in that space. We might want to extend that to other regions or countries here. And the other point that we've always made in the work programs is that we're doing this in context of the commitment to align the standards with authoritative instruments. And that necessitates engagement with the UN system, the OECD, and that we will continue to do that. And our work on the labor standards, for example, is what I would always bring forward as a proof point of that continued engagement. And then lately, I think the last work program was probably the first one, where we then identified specific standard setting types on national level, regional level, international level, and collaborations with them. And the work program, of course, gives the opportunity to formulate the ambition of the GSB vis-a-vis different engagements of standard setters. So we can become specific with some of the players that you want to engage with. That's what I would put to the cooperation with partners. That's an outline.
Okay, so I think we're clear from the discussions that we've been having that in terms of working with the ISSB and the IFRS Foundation staff, the priority based on our MOUs is to work on an articulation of the global reporting system and the fit within that, and that will then inform the collaboration that we want to continue with on the sector standards and biodiversity/Bs. So we can reflect that in the paper. In terms of EFRAG, from what we've discussed, I think it is about the priority would be to work on how we encourage European companies that are using GRI disclosures that are in the ESRS to articulate that they are reporting with reference to GRI standards, thereby opening up the possibility of them expanding their reporting over time. So we can reflect that in the paper.
Yep.
Okay, and in terms of the SSBJ, we have our work that we've agreed on the link between impacts, risks, and opportunities. We're awaiting funding from that, and you're going to have a discussion with the technical lead executive director on project management, funding, and so on. Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Then that leaves the IAASB, and I guess with the IESBA. That is the work that we plan to do with them as a standard setting board is just increasing uptake of their standards for the benefit of better reporting and looking at how we
Yeah, just for the work of the IAASB, if we move to updating the universal standards, there is reference to, of course, assurance practice. And once we are at that point in time, we probably have first evidence of the application of the new assurance standards. So that is where we can consider a reference, and that would necessitate a dialogue with them. So that's something we can look at the time.
Great. And then in terms of public sector reporting, our approach is to reach out more. We've done some research on public sector reporting. We are now able to have and hope to have people from a public sector reporting background in our technical working groups on the GSSB with the change in the nomination committee criteria and groupings. And so we will be making our standards even more fit for public sector organizations to use. Okay, is there anything else that we need to discuss in terms of moving to the next draft of the work program, Bastian?
Maybe just, I think there are two ways we can advance this now. And one is that staff applies the changes that were discussed. We're also picking up on, one example that Charles has given, creating more of a table structure also for the immediate next priorities. We can apply these changes now. And in advance of the December meeting, we could put this again on file stage just for comment so that we can, provided that there are no significant comments anymore in terms of change, we could move to an approval at the meeting in December. Given what I heard today, I think creating a draft that would enable us to have a review on file stage first and then going into a discussion at the meeting with sufficient time should be very possible. The only thing I would want to flag is if there's anything coming to mind that would still be further change to this draft, we would need to know within the next 5 working days, because technically we need to post, I'm looking at Jill, end of next week. So this is a quick turnaround for us.
Okay, thank you. Any further comments on the work program? Nope. Okay, thank you all very much.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Bastian. And we move now to the next session on the financial services sector project. Oh no, we have a break. Sorry. Do we want a break? Yes. Yes. Okay, we'll have a 15-minute break. 15 is all. I said 15-minute break.